Okay. Hello? Oleg?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so welcome to Sprint 12 review. We've done a lot this sprint. I think we've closed up 90 issues, but not many of them were features. So I'm just going to go through the slides here and discuss what was closed and talk about the highlights of the sprint. Next slide. So those are the things we're going to talk about. Next slide. All right, so just to recap, the sprints are 3 weeks long, and each of them ends on Monday, Monday night, Monday evening. We've added, in the sprint, we've added GitHub milestones for each sprint. So you'll be able to see by sprint what issues were merged. And we've also added a milestone called roadmap. That's what we're using for anything going forward, any future items. For example, the upgrade to Ruby 2.x, the upgrade to Rails, the integration with Foreman, all that kind of stuff. That's all sitting on the roadmap milestone. And the idea there is that hopefully we'll have high-level issues with subtasks underneath that we can use the GitHub Markdown format with the checkboxes and move along that way. Also in those issues, it would probably be a good idea to lay out the design for something like Foreman integration or Docker integration or anything else we're going to do down the road here. So those kinds of things need designs. I think for things like upgrading to Ruby or Rails, I doubt that we need much of a design. It's kind of obvious what it is. Okay. Next slide. So the sprint that just ended, sprint 12, there's the link at the top of what was, if you go there, you'll see the milestone from a GitHub perspective. There were over 90 pull requests merged. 63 of them were labeled as bug. 15 issues were labeled as appliance, and 22 issues were labeled as enhancements. So we'll go forward and probably talk about the majority of the things we'll talk about are enhancements. Next slide. All right, so on the user interface, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he'll discuss the highlights of the UI enhancements.
All right, sounds good. As Oleg said, basically we've been heads down on fixing bugs and a lot of urgent bugs and a release coming up and stuff. So we had a lot of work to do there. Basically, the only thing you're going to see in the interface is some of the new form buttons that Eric's been working on, Eric Winchell. And he's been working on a lot of Patternfly updates and RCUE, Red Hat Common User Experience updates as well. But I think he finished up all the form buttons in this sprint, so I'll let him talk about that a little bit, and that's about it for the UI. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, great. Next slide, please.
Hold on.
So we continue our latest effort to incorporate RCUE styling into the UI. In the last few weeks, we've replaced about 200 image-based buttons with button tags using Patternfly, which is modified Bootstrap, CSS styling in 3 classes: primary, default, and danger. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the save button is in the primary class, which is blue, and the others are in default. When we go to the next screen, you'll see the danger class. This project was essential for our localization work. It's also important for skinning. We may adopt different colors for the primary button, for example, syncing up with the header accent color and other elements. Also important for accessibility. The user can scale these buttons to any size. And it will also be easy to incorporate other UX elements like drop-downs as we go down the road. Next slide, please. And on the screen, you see an example of the danger button is in red. We still have 1 or 2 more buttons to work on, plus the browse buttons need to be styled in the same way. If you see any buttons that aren't working properly, please let me know or create a ticket. Down the road, the next few months, we'll probably be working on form styling, pagination, styling updates, two-level tabs, and continued work on incorporating glyph icons as we add fancy tree. And that's it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So talk about the enhancements to automate in this sprint. Here, yeah, we can just jump to the next slide. One of the things that we realized is that when you were provisioning, that we were allowing you on Amazon to select flavors that didn't match the image type that you were using or that you wanted to clone from. So researching this more, we realized that we weren't collecting the virtualization type, which under Amazon is paravirtualization or HVM. We needed to collect that data for the image as well as the flavors to be able to filter those during provisioning. So here you can see on one of the images that we're reporting the flavor. It's also listed. If you go to the provider and look at the list of images, it's available on that screen as well. Then if you go to the next slide. Okay, so this isn't really meant to be read as much as see the difference on the left is the images we were showing, which previously were only filtered by the architecture of the flavor and the selected image. So now with virtualization type, we can filter it down further. Before basically we were letting you select image types or flavors that would fail to provision correctly. Looking at it further, we have one more PR in to filter this a little bit further by the storage type as well. So that'll get it down to matching exactly how the Amazon UI allows you to pick the corresponding flavor. So getting that cleaned up. All right, next slide. So from the service model side, this one's just kind of giving you a quick idea, but these are all the different classes that we expose for cloud through the automate layer. You look all the way to the right, EMS Cloud or the provider was there with all the different exposed relationships except for Cloud Tenant, which is a relatively new model. So Cloud Tenant was added, as well as everything to the left, all the relationships were exposed, which the models were there, but not the exposed relationships before to automate. So that's all been made available. So it can be used from automated scripts now. All right, next. All right. So this is a request we've had for a while from the field, which is in Automate. If you're in a state machine and you're performing retries, you didn't have a way to store values that you may have determined on your first pass that you need to use for logic when the retry comes back. So what we've done is expose 3 new methods that allow you to query if save a variable, retrieve that variable, and also query if it exists in the first place. So I know one of the places that this was, that the field wanted this for was for retirement of VMs, where they want to be able to delay the retirement for some period of time. So they would capture data on the first pass and then put their state machine to sleep for sometimes a matter of days, and then rewake and want to reevaluate the environment at that point. But they didn't have a way to capture some of the key values and recall them on the second pass. So this will help there. I put a quick example in there just to show it. It's not all that interesting, but the first pass, obviously, it'll run through the else case because the test data doesn't exist. And then the second pass, it'll see that it exists and pull that data in. One of the things I didn't want to kind of show here, but let you know, is that when you're requesting the value, it doesn't matter if it's a symbol or string. It will resolve to the same value. So if you test data or quote test data, you'll end up referring to the same value in the back. The set data value here, I'm just using a simple integer type, but those could be complex structures as well. You could put a hash in there, you could put an array, you can store other values in there, so it's not just restricted to simple data types.
A question on this?
Sure.
What does this only support simple types, or can people put in time and date? Or
that's what I was just saying. Yeah, so you can put in hashes. Nope. You can put in complex types. So it could be hashes with time values inside of it.
You put objects? Like, could you put a service model itself or something like that? Because I know that under the covers it's YAMLing it. So
yeah, I haven't tried it with another service model.
So people shouldn't do that, right? At this point, people should just stick with simple types and maybe just standard Ruby types, right?
I would think
strings, numbers, and maybe time and date.
Objects would be, we'd have to test it out, but.
So for now, it's not supported.
Right. Good question. All right, next, please. All right, so some changes to the automate model. I think we kind of showed these last time, but they weren't fully committed yet, so I just wanted to point them out here. This for provisioning, the state machine auto placement was always run through the profile, and you didn't have any control over those elements were executed. So now moving it to the state machine, the designer of the state machine has the ability to define when that process runs, so they can do things before or after, whatever kind of logic they need. It gives them the flexibility to control exactly when the auto placement is going to run. So that's all in place now for cloud and infrastructure, as well as our basic methods for doing the best fit placement on both sides. And then we added a finish state to all of the standard states. Before this was done as a little hacky as the on exit state of the last step in the state machine. It was weird the way it was done. So we've commonized it now. It works exactly the same as it was before, but it's actually got its own defined state at this point. It makes it a little nicer to read. All right, next. So for the infrastructure side, we've always had from the automate models or automate state machines the ability to get eligible resources, which is filtering, the same filtering you see in the UI. I think this will be really helpful for the field where if you've selected, for example, a cloud network to know what cloud subnets are available, selected security groups that things are interrelated.
Somebody turn off their mic. They're typing and breathing.
So all of these eligible methods deal with the interrelationships. It drives the same workflow that's used from the UI. So if you see it in the UI, it's the same experience you're going to have from the scripting side.
That's cool.
So this will obviously take into effect the work that we were doing on the instance type as well. Get that once you select the image. Currently, what people are doing today is looking at the provider, looking at all the instance types. These are the only ones that apply. So, kind of glad we got that. All right. That might be the last slide there. Can you go one more? Okay. So I think before we get into that, Jason, can you talk about or Brendan's here, the rubyrep changes that were made? Brendan, you want to talk about it? Or?
Sure. Okay.
Close to my machine.
He wasn't supposed to be here.
All right. So at a couple of customers, we noticed a lot of problems with rubyrep. They would run into things where replication would just stop working completely. One of the big problems that I noticed was that somehow we got into a case where the changes on the local side had already been replicated to the remote side. And for whatever reason, those insert changes were never deleted from the local side. So I switched to using Active Records transaction method to create and release save points rather than the way that they were previously doing it. This handles exceptions better and caught the duplicate key errors that we were running into. So that solved that problem. Also noticed that when there was a large backlog, like over 1,000 changes on the local side, when they would try to replicate that, it would start to replicate, and then once it got past that 1,000th change, it would try to commit the transaction block, and then open a new transaction block, try to release a save point that doesn't exist anymore. So I moved their commit for the buffer committer outside of the create and release save point, and that also fixed that error. So then after the first 1,000 records were processed, it would create a new transaction block and process another 1,000. Before, it would just process the first 1,000 and then completely blow up, never be able to replicate anything.
So that's why it was stuck, basically.
Right. So those were the two major changes.
And that's on our fork of rubyrep, the rubyrep.
Fork of rubyrep.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that we've had this issue for years. So
This is a big win. Sure. Yeah, it would be good if we can push this back to upstream, but I think, as you mentioned before, upstream is not really maintained.
Not very well maintained.
Yeah, so we might have to become the owners.
I wanted to use the active record transaction method to control all of the transaction block creation and deletion, but at this time it was just too complicated to do because they set up both a local and a remote transaction. So I wound up just using it for creating and releasing save points.
Okay.
That's it for now.
Okie doke. All right. So the next things we wanted to talk about were around the appliance. Keenan, you want to give us I don't think that we need a demo. If you could just discuss kind of the things that that were added for the appliance.
Oh, sure. So our goals around the appliance, most of the work we did this sprint has been focused around obviously appliances configuration, but focusing around some of the automation aspects. So now, instead of just using the appliance console to set up temporary disks for fleecing, we're able to use the command line interface, which is getting more and more functionality for the appliance console. So we added past tense, the temp disk support so that you could create those. A short term that's for the QE team will be using that more, but I'm getting more and more emails like throughout the week of other customers who can use that.
Awesome.
Also key generation. So this whole sprint, just in the idea of security, we've focused on not including a default key with our appliance. Still in the open source side of things we are, but in the CFME aspect we're not. And that is potentially, and we're looking at ways of moving forward so that we can encourage out of the box for more customers to be secure. So the key generation, they can generate keys, and also for customers that want to use SSL to connect to the database, we have that built in. If they're using IPA, they can say, please generate SSL certificates for us, and then we can have a secure communication for the client to talk to the database itself. And so they're a little behind the scenes. That is us building upon our commitment to IPA, which is free IPA, the open source, or people also call it IDM, identity management. But it really, it's at least the basis of starting our customers for moving forward and allowing them to have SSL everywhere. CertMonger happens to be the tool that is used with IDM, identity management, or free IPA or IPA. They go by a lot of different fun names. And CertMonger is the actual tool which allows somebody not to be very intimately, to have intimate knowledge of OpenSSL. Usually it's Stack Overflow least a couple of hours of trying to figure out how to create a certificate. And so using CertMonger, we've really removed that from a lot of our customers, which is always a good thing, right? Yeah.
Cool.
IP research for single sign-on.
Yeah, Alberto, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So one of the things we've done this sprint is now that we have enabled external authentication between ManageIQ and IPA Server. So from the Appliance console, you enable that with external authentication. So you can go into the appliance using your IPA Server credentials. So that's step one. So the part of this investigation is how do we leverage the Kerberos tickets? So let's say you are on a system or where your browser is running, and you have your valid Kerberos ticket from IPA Server. So the investigation was around, working with the Apache configuration, honoring the Kerberos negotiation, and with that, how to be able to get in directly to our dashboard without having to log in. So to be able to just hit the ManageIQ URL and be sent directly to the dashboard. So a lot of that work, was in the sprint, and so we have good research on the basic prototype, and that was listed out on talk. So that was a lot of this work.
Did we have the result of the results of the research? How we want to proceed forward? Is that listed on talk as well?
That's what's on talk. How the interaction will be in the UI.
Once we implement it, it kind of shows the design of all that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So that's how.
Excellent. Next slide, please.
I have a question on the key generation.
Okay.
For key, as we do this for our customers and we make it much easier to have all this happen, one of the things that we need to consider is how we give the customer a best practice and how they back up those certs, because if they are doing all the things they're supposed to do, including backing up their database and everything else, they're not necessarily backing up these certs, and they're going to need that to be able to recreate an environment.
Yep.
A great statement. But that is one reason why we're tying into the free IPA, which uses Kerberos behind the scenes, which is why we'll be mentioning Kerberos probably over the next few calls. That central identity management that we're using from free IPA gives the customers the ability, to manage those certificates, and also the ability to revoke them. And we are working with that team and meeting up with them next week, and then also later on to establish a higher level long-term goal, not just for us in terms of best practices, but really working with them on stating how they want to talk to the whole community in terms of how we want to move forward. So, sorry, TLDR, to make it short, yes, when we use free IPA, that escrowing that you're talking about of keys will be provided in the current implementation.
That's true, but unless I misunderstand, we're doing all this on the appliance, correct? Or are you talking about external? So if it's all on the appliance and I do something and hose my virtual disk and I can't get back to it, right? Then all of my escrow's in the same place too.
Okay, great. So free IPA, it's a little bigger. Most of the companies, I'm guessing, but I need your feedback. Most of the companies will be using free IPA. This free IPA is a full implementation in and of itself, so it will be external. And this is you can think of it like LDAP. Some people have DNS in here, also generation of keys and key escrowing, central identity, login support for single sign-on, all of that good stuff is all provided by IPA, free IPA IDM. And so that is external to the appliance. And a lot of customers, since they have, say, Windows Active Directory or something like that, that is a centralized identity management system. So it will be external to the appliance. So if you completely hose your appliance, that is not an issue. You can say the counterpositive, having an external central identity may be an issue, but That's at least the way that.
So you should follow the best practices of the IPA system, right?
Right.
In terms of how you want to manage the keys and all that.
Yeah, definitely. We're just following their best practices for security. That is what they do night and day. So we just followed their lead.
So if somebody's not using the external IPA, they just get an appliance and start going off with that. That's the other concern, right? Is you have this IPA and best practices when it's external, but what are the best practices when you're generating stuff and doing things on the local appliance that will allow you to recreate what you've got, right? Once you start doing all this.
Yeah, if you use the phrase IPA, it's not if it's external, it's actually it is external. So we did provide, say, proof of concepts. You want to get out of the box as quickly as possible. In that case, we do provide a smaller, we call it, I call it sneakerware, where you're copying keys around manually. And if you decide to go that route, then and you lose it from the USB key, yes, you are on your own if you decide to go that route. But the definition of IPA is central identity. And so if you have central identity, that centralized source is actually external to us. So it's not the if.
I think the confusion is it almost sounds like a customer can't take an appliance and just drop it in today, the way you're describing it.
Okay.
Right? Key generation is actually part of our, like we can still generate keys without IPA, basically. But you have to get that key out and over to another system. And he's saying if you drop one appliance in and it's hosed, you're out. Because how do you kind of get it out?
Okay, so let's try that again. Sorry. There are two different kinds of security that we're providing. Key generation, the phrase that you all are talking about that I wasn't, is focused around encrypting your particular provider credentials. So these are the secrets that are your OpenStack VMware passwords. That stuff, okay, that's one. And then the other is SSL, which is cert monger. For the first one, for key generation, that's internal. It does not use external components. And if you lose that, you are hosed in terms of obtaining your credentials. We cannot help a customer get those back because we opted to go a route that we can't access them. They are secure. But we do have the ability to go through your system and to reset them. So if you do lose those keys, you lose your provider passwords, but the rest of your database is still accessible. And then that's the you can just drop that into your appliance and you can access that. So yeah, I know the varying differences of host, but we definitely work that if a customer gives us a database or a customer shares another database with another, they can access the system. It's just the passwords are off limits unless they have that one key. So if you lose that one key and you didn't lose your database, which again, I don't know, maybe that's a possible use case, then yes, you do lose those credentials that were encrypted, but all the rest of your data is okay and you can access it. And we do provide scripts as of 5.2.4 to be able to regenerate those keys and to scrub databases in case somebody wants to mail one to a customer and you don't want to share your data. So at least that's been in place for a little while now.
Does it make sense to have either part of the existing backup or a separate thing where you can say, like, get me my key so I can keep it in my secure location?
Right. So,
I mean, obviously you can SSH in and get it, but, you know, that's kind of.
Okay, so but the idea is we could like store that just right in the database, but then somebody has access to the database and they have access.
That's storing the keys with the locks. That doesn't make sense.
Right. So then that's the same thing is does somebody want to back it up? And then if they just put the key right next to it,
right.
It's not in the lock, but it's
right next to it.
Right next to the lock.
Maybe they should snapshot the VM or something. We are using virtual technologies here. So.
That's true. You could use snapshots. So.
And then right now I'm in the middle of a PR for review that potentially will make it into 5.3. There are one or two little caveats in there, but that will copy keys around for you right off the bat. So that's there. But in the longer term, goal is just to remove passwords altogether from our database. But that's, again, sorry, that's totally up in the air. Never mind. I didn't say that.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, to answer my question, I just want to be cognizant that as we're doing things where we're generating things, that we have a clean way for people to know what they need to back up so that they can get themselves back to where they need to be with all those pieces.
Good, thank you.
Fair enough. So that's more of a documentation kind of process question, right? For them to know what information they need to store offline somewhere. Okay, we'll document that. Cool. Next slide, please. All right, LJ, I think this one's yours.
Yeah. So one of the first things we were going to start looking at was upgrading to Ruby 2.0. So some of these are what changes we can make to our code base that is still compatible with 1.9.3. So that's one of the primary things that we started working on this past sprint. There was also an appliance issue with log rotate, where we weren't actually rotating logs due to a SE Linux issue. So with some help from Alberto and Keenan, we got that fixed. And there are a few different bugs and enhancements that required gem upgrades. That's always good, since some of them were rather old. And I started going through varying libraries that we have and extensions that could possibly be issues with Ruby 2 and then also Rails 4. And just started to look at how we use those libraries, if they need to be replaced, upgraded, that kind of thing.
Okay. That's it. Cool. Next slide, please. All right. REST API.
Yep. Okay, so for this, actually I have a little demo to show with this. So,
Want to talk about it first and then demo it?
I'll talk about it and I'll demo it.
Yep.
So when we added support for external authentication with IPA, so you can get into the ManageIQ web UI using those credentials, but we never enabled the REST API or actually the SOAP API to honor that. So this actually was a fix for that. So let me jump over to demo. So I'll share my desktop. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's see. Okay, so I have here an appliance running. I've configured it to for external authentication, as you see here, external auth. Which is okay. Plus.
You do.
Which one?
The plus side of the left one.
Where's that?
Green.
Okay. All right, so I've configured, again, the appliance for external authentication. Here I have the Sept, an external, the IPA server running in my my test domain. So just to show, let's go at, okay, so this is an IPA server running. I have accounts, user accounts defined. And as you can see from ManageIQ UI, here I could get in using the IPA server defined, and at the same time, from an API REST API perspective, this is better. So not only okay, so this is getting in as admin smart VM. Okay, So the fix was essentially to allow also coming in through the REST API with any of the IPA user credentials, and that would go in. And the entry point is similar to the web UI. Again, in this case, configure. Yeah. So we've seen the user getting created dynamically, like we do entering with the web UI. Same thing with the REST API. Let's say I'm going in as another IPA user account, and I'm in. So it's done the same. There we go. So again, that was a fix, so that we can go in the same way, both SOAP, REST API, and web UI with the same IP.
So now they're all symmetrical for the first time, right? Excellent.
That was it.
Very good. All right. Marianne, you want to take control back? And jump to the next slide. I think it's the last one. So on the VM fleecing side, hopefully the slide is self-explanatory. There's a pull request that's out there. It's a work in progress. Most of the code is complete. We're expecting the whole thing to be finished in the sprint. One of the main things that it's lacking is some unit tests, and there's some other things that are being reviewed. So if you kind of want to see the work in progress, just jump to that pull request and take a look at where that is. But we are expecting that to land at the end of the sprint. Okay. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda, so I'd like to open it up for questions or comments. Anybody? Okay.
I just want to mention that these slides will probably be available. I think we decided we'll put them with the YouTube video and probably somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll be on the. I'll put them with the YouTube video.
Excellent. All right. Then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have a new colleague today with us. Aaron Patterson has joined us, and hoping that he'll help us in all sorts of things here with the project. Welcome aboard, Aaron.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any other questions, comments? All righty. No. Thank you all very much, and look forward to the next sprint demo.